just a second. Let Facebook send out their alerts before we get started. Let's see who's out there. Let's see, hopefully Facebook is not throttling back the alerts and actually letting people know. I don't know if I become a target or not, but we'll see. Let's see who's out there on the Unhyphenated America page. Give me a thumbs up if you're there and listening. Let me know you're there before we start running with this. And as always, if you're listening, give me a thumbs up, give me a shout out, and if you wouldn't mind, send me a message, just kind of type in what city or state you're calling or listening from. I can't look at the screen. I do see somebody popped up, but I can't look at the screen because I'm driving, which is my favorite place to do the videos from. My car is comfortable, climate controlled, and all that good stuff, but give this a second to see who's there. Good afternoon, or should I say good evening? Listen, I'm always confused as to whether, it's like 6 o'clock, so it's 6 p.m. Eastern time, and I have to check on that. Somebody got to tell me, is 6 o'clock considered to be afternoon or evening? Anyway, we'll say good afternoon. So good afternoon. Happy Tuesday. And how y'all doing? This is Christopher Harris, Executive Director of Unhyphenatedamerica.org, which you already know that because you're on the Unhyphenated America page. But yeah, anyway, you just got to say it anyway. What's going on, y'all? Listen, I was just talking to some of my boys and, some of the fellas, because iron sharpens iron. I have a small select group of gentlemen that are the iron that helps to sharpen my iron. And I was, this subject came to my mind, and I said, before I go on and do a live video, let me holler at my boys real quick and kind of work my thoughts out, help them to, have them help me to kind of make things more clear. But, yeah, the subject, as you can see, is on reparations and then what? And if you're not familiar with the topic, the subject of reparations, long story short, there are a group of African American, and I got to do the finger quotes, African American so-called intellectuals, always Marxist minded, who are dogmatically pushing the case for reparations. Reparations for whom, you say? For the descendants of the slaves sold from Africa. Now, granted, they don't specifically say sold from Africa. They always say taken from Africa, without taking into account the fact that they were sold from Africa and brought to America. And so they believe that the wealth of the United States is largely due, or almost exclusively due, to the institution of slavery that was, as they say, condoned by the United States government. And since the United States government condoned slavery, all the wealth that was created during that time period, which was built up afterwards, that wealth was built upon the wealth that was created, all that wealth, the descendants of African slaves are entitled to a portion, reparations. So I myself am a descendant of African slaves, and I know this. My family has done our DNA. We know where my genetics come from on the continent of Africa. And, that is one of those things that I am supposedly entitled. So, and my wife is calling, so my Bluetooth is like buzzing because my wife's calling, but I had to send her a message or contact her right afterwards. But yeah, sorry, babe. But anyway, so that's why I was distracted. So yeah, and here's the folly in that whole thing. Like, I always like to ask, I come from an analytical IT background, and so I've learned to look at things, and I like to ask the question, and then what? Because people like to assume that things happen in a vacuum, that if you just do this, then that's all that will happen, without asking the question about what happens afterwards. And so I'm always asking the question, okay, let's say we go with what you're proposing, and then what? What will be the results? Now, see, what they will try to tell you is that the results will be that, well, first of all, let's understand, reparations represent a transfer of wealth. They believe that there is an inordinate amount of wealth held by non-black people, non-African Americans, and once again, that is solely, exclusively because of the evil white man bringing blacks to the United States of America in slavery. So, that's what they want to believe. And so I've read a lot of different things from people when they try to say, like, what this transfer of wealth should amount to, how much it should be. But it's kind of a ridiculous thing from an econ. Like, if you ever follow me before, I do these Econ 101 videos. And from an Econ 101 standpoint, it's just stupid also. First of all, do you realize that the United States of America is broke? Well, not so much broke. Actually, that's not the correct term. The United States of America is deeply in debt. That our debt actually equals, I think it might have surpassed, our GDP. So the amount of money that we owe to foreign entities, to our creditors, and so on and so forth, is equal to our income, what we produce every year. And this is one of those things, when you talk about economics, you talk about finance, if you were in that financial position, if you were going to buy a house, and you were trying to buy a $300,000 house, just using, I think the median house value in the United States might be $200,000. Okay, let's just say $200,000. Let's lower it. If you were trying to buy a $200,000 house, and your debt from consumer debt, student loans, credit cards, so on and so forth, was $200,000 also, and you went to any creditor, any lender, and said, hey, I'd like to, be able to get a house, they would roll their eyes. Their eyes would roll back so hard they would be able to see their own brain. They'd be like, dude, are you kidding me? Are you for serious? Right, as the saying goes, are you for serious? that you're asking us to loan you money when that would essentially double the amount of debt you have, and be double. That would mean that your debt would actually be double your annual income. Well, that's just stupid. Nobody's going to loan you that money. So the United States of America already has a greater debt than we do annual production. It's one of those things that people don't think about with the Econ 101 situation. So here's the thing. Where's the money going to come from? I mean, let's say it's not going to be a direct transfer of wealth, that the United States is not going to write a check to the descendants of slaves taken from Africa, or more accurately, sold from Africa to the United States of America. Let's say it's going to come in a from the perspective of not charging taxes. So, and there's another thing: who's eligible? See, these are questions that analytical, critical thinking people ask, who's eligible? See, I am, because I can show. We have birth certificates and all those things. We can show, because I know my family lineage going back 6 generations, excuse me, to my 3 times great-grandfather who was born a slave in Virginia in 1813. We can show that. And here's the thing. He was the son, the progeny, if you will, of a white man and a African woman. So in my direct paternal lineage, it goes back black for 6 generations, and then it's white. And you know, the interesting thing, because my family's done our whole genealogy, we're able to trace back and see that my family and my direct paternal line has been in the United States since, I want to say 1619. It's in the 16 early, 16, like 1613, 1619, but I know it's in the early 1600s, going back in my direct bloodline. So, the fact that I am the descendant of slaves, but there's some white in my bloodline, am I eligible for 100%? I mean, like, if you're going to do it, do you have to be, 100% black in order to get 100% reparations? Do you get a lesser percentage based on your percentage of European blood? Now, here's an interesting thing. There is an African-American historian, Skip Gates, who does happen to be a fraternity brother of mine. I am a member of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, which was the first black Greek letter fraternity, founded in 1906, 06 baby, at Cornell University. I am a member of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. But Skip Gates is a fraternity brother of mine. Skip Gates happens to be the gentleman who was at the center of the whole Beergate thing, where he was arrested by a white cop because he supposedly was being belligerent and wouldn't give his information. Excuse me. It was thought he might be breaking into his house, and that's when POTUS 44, who, I don't like saying his name, so I refer to him as POTUS 44, invited Skip Gates and the white police officer to the White House for a Beergate summit. But anyway, Skip Gates is a noted historian, and he actually has produced good information. Even though I disagree with him on some geopolitical, socioeconomic things, in terms of a researcher, he's actually a very good researcher. So some of the information he's pointed out, I was in the Barnes & Noble bookstore, which, by the way, like I said, in order to do what I do on TV, radio, social media, and articles that I write for the Unhyphenated America webpage, I have to do I'm constantly studying, constantly reading, which is not a big deal for me because that's just the way my brain works. I enjoy doing that, but I have to do that if I want to stay, competent and confident and credible. So here's one of the things. He has a book called 100 Fascinating Facts or Amazing Facts About the Negro. And I was just skimming through it. I didn't pick it up because I had some other things I was going to pick up, but I saw it in the bookstore, and I just happened to scroll through, and I saw one of the things. And one of the things it said was that, using the whole one-drop rule, which is what was used to denote whether or not you were a Negro, which is one of the interesting things, that there were plenty of people who used to pass because if they were fair-skinned enough, even though they were of some sort of Negro birth, if they were fair-skinned enough, they would pass as white. And he was saying in this article, in this book, that in places like Alabama, for example, roughly 10%, and don't quote me on the exact number, it's just the number that comes to my mind right now, but I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% of whites in Alabama actually have black blood. And, they're passing as white. Some of them are actively passing as white, and some of them don't know that they actually have black blood in them. But then he pointed out in a place like New Orleans, which actually has been a multi-ethnic town for a long time, or Louisiana in general, I'm sorry, upwards of 22% of the people in Louisiana who are white actually have black blood and would be characterized as Negroes, according to the whole one drop rule. So that's interesting, because let's say we do this whole reparations thing based upon blood. That if you are genetically black, right, based on the whole one drop blood rule, so even if you've been passing as white, that would mean that you're eligible to receive, reparations. And I guess they'd say, hey, you're either going to get 1/16, 1/8, 1/4, whatever, with those who can prove to have pure black blood getting the full share. But here's something that's also interesting. It's like one of my buddies is actually Jamaican. Now, he's an American, born and raised in the United States of America, he's over 50 years old, but his parents immigrated legally from Jamaica in the 40s. And they went through the trouble to become American citizens, the whole green card, naturalized citizen thing, because they specifically wanted to be Americans, and they wanted to make sure that their children were Americans. Likewise, the same goes for my wife's family. And here's the interesting thing. So this transfer of wealth is going to come from Americans, right? Non-African Americans, to use the term, I guess that's how they want to characterize it. So the transfer of wealth is going to go from non-African Americans to African Americans, is what this would how this would have to be. The interesting thing about that is that would mean, and however this transfer of wealth happens, whether it's direct payment or whether it is tax credits or the like, however it's, some form of discount, right? You don't have to pay taxes, or you get, free college or whatever, however it's done, that would mean that someone like my buddy or someone like my wife, see, because people look at me and they look at my wife and we're both black, right? But according to how people would tend to characterize it, I am a, quote, African American, which, by the way, don't call me an African American. I hate that damn term. So don't call me an African American. You might get a rude gesture from me. But for argument's sake, with this conversation, I am a, quote, African American, whereas my wife is not. Why? Because even though she and I have the same skin tone, and the funny thing is that her father's fairly dark, like my father's fairly dark, and her mother is a slightly lighter brown than I am, like my mother is a slightly lighter brown than I am, her parents migrated legally from Panama to the United States. And they've had zero intention, desire to ever move back. Heck, they have barely gone back to visit, except for when some family member died. Otherwise, they had no desire to go back to Panama, right? You don't go through all the trouble to migrate just to go back, right? Because there's a reason why you left to begin with. If things were so great, you would not have left. So the interesting thing behind that is that my wife would actually, and her family, and by the way, my sister-in-law, so my wife's sister, is married to a guy of Haitian descent. In fact, he's actually a Haitian immigrant. He's a United States citizen, naturalized citizen, but when he was in his early teens, his family immigrated from Haiti to the United States. He's a U.S. citizen now, but he is of Haitian birth, Haitian heritage. So he would not be eligible for this reparations because he's not African American. So essentially, I can go to my wife, my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and say, hey, you owe me money. Well, not really you, it's the evil white man. But we can't specifically take the money from the evil white man, so end of the day, it's going to have to come out of the U.S. Treasury in some way, shape, or form, which means that everybody who's not African American is going to have to pony up some money because my family 150 plus years ago was wronged by the institution of slavery. So come on, in-laws, cough up the money. Wife, come on. Give up the money. Come on. Right? Anyway, it just sounds stupid when you say it. So yeah, the whole topic of reparations it is just fascinating when you think about how stupid it sounds. And it really is a stupid thing. But once again, and then what? See, here's the thing. If there is a lawsuit, right? If there's a civil lawsuit and it goes to court and it's determined in court, hang on one second, I'm going to do something real quick. It's determined in court that one party wronged the other party and that one party owes reparations, or more, I guess specifically it's what's the word I'm looking for? I'm having a brain fart moment from a legal standpoint. Like I said, basically when you're having to pay, what's the word? You guys know what I'm saying. You're having to pay punitive, thank you, punitive damages. So one party owes punitive damages to the other party. So here's the thing. Once those punitive damages are paid, that's it. We're done. It's been determined that I'm wrong and you're right, that I wronged you. I owe you damages to help make you whole. So here's the thing. I got to break out my checkbook. I write you this check, and that's the end of our interactions. I'm done. We're done. We go our separate ways. I don't have to have any further contact with you or like that. It's it. It's been adjudicated. That's it. So the question I have to ask is, let's say it's decided in a court of law that reparations, excuse me, punitive damages are owed. And then what? Does that mean that once this is paid, let's say it's going to be a lump sum check. Once this is paid, does that mean that I don't owe you anything else? That you can't hold anything over my head? Because that's the way it works in a court of law. You can't hold anything. We're taking this to court. And it's been taken to court, and it's decided that I owe you reparations, punitive damages. I pay you that. We're done. I don't have to talk to you anymore. I don't have to deal with you anymore. So are you telling me that you would be happy, that would be the end? I don't have to hear from you anymore or anything like that. Once these reparations are paid, it's all said and done. You know, are you telling me that's the case? No, it's not true. Because here's the thing about Marxist-minded people, leftist, regressive, socialist-minded people in general, and Marxist-minded Negroes, African Americans, if you will, in particular. It's not really about the reparations. If they're willing to be honest, they will tell you they don't just want money. They want to be able to hold something over the heads of other people. Because here's the reality. And if you listen to them, if you watch, if you listen to the rhetoric, here's what you have to understand. You're talking about a group of people who have made the decision, who have staked out the position that they're the biggest loser. In every given situation, they have determined that they're going to be the biggest victim in the room. Why? Well, because there's a benefit. You wouldn't claim to be the biggest loser, the biggest victim in the room, if there was not some sort of payoff. It's like Dr. Phil said, so, you know, what's the payoff? You have to be getting something out of it, whether it's just simply, whether it's just, you know, having all the attention upon you. What's the payoff? So if I pay you off, I mean, the reality is, it's funny because we're talking about this in light of the allegations against President Trump that he supposedly paid off this individual, who I'm not even going to bother saying her name, but that he supposedly engaged in consensual sexual intercourse with her and then paid her through his lawyer, supposedly, this transfer of funds, this non-disclosure agreement to pay her off, to pay off her silence. Well, okay, if in fact it's a transaction like that, it is a voluntary transaction. and it's paying you off so I don't have to deal with you anymore. The reality, is that you don't want to be paid off and then be told, now go away. If you're being honest, which you're not, which you never are, you don't just want that. See, because here's the reality. It's no different than lottery winners. It's no different than professional athletes. At the end of the day, this large transfer of funds, because you did nothing to earn it. Yeah, we're not going to say, oh yeah, but my family, my great. First of all, listen, I'm just going to keep it real with you. With the majority of the people who are making this claim that I'm owed reparations, you don't even know who your daddy is. Just be real. If your name is something, look, if your name is something like Daquan, you might know who your father is. You probably don't know who your paternal grandfather is. You almost certainly don't know who your paternal great-grandfather is. It's just the reality. When you meet somebody whose name is, Daquan or some other made-up African-American name, and I say it's made up because it has no roots in anything historical. It's not rooted in any African name. It's not rooted in any European name. It's purely made up. It's something your mama made up when she was in labor pains and she spelled it out phonetically. So anyway, there's a good chance that if your name is Daquan or any one of those names that, like, if you ever watched that Key and Peele skit when they made fun of football players when they were doing the announcement, announcing the names of these football players, there's a good chance, like I said, you might know who your daddy is. I'm willing to bet there's a better than 50-50 chance that you don't know who your grandfather is. And there's about a 99% chance you couldn't say who your paternal grandfather is. So how are you going to make the case that you're owed reparations? Now, see, you could sit there and try to make the case if you were a slave. And as that dude Thomas Sowell made it clear, we cannot say for certain that 100 years after slavery, that the effects of slavery were the cause for the birth rate, the out-of-wedlock birth rate among blacks in 1965, right? But we can say with almost absolute certainty what the effects of the Great Society policies were on the out-of-wedlock birth rate among blacks in 2018. Because the out-of-wedlock birth rate among blacks by 1965 or so was like 20%, 22%, whatever the exact numbers. So 100 years after slavery, the out-of-wedlock birth rate was only like 21, 22%, something like that. But 50 years after the Great Society, it's over 75%. It's roughly 75%. If you're being an intellectually honest person, you will acknowledge this simple fact that you have to attribute it to the effects, the mindset, the cultural beliefs that were created as a result of the Great Society. So this whole thing about reparations, when you really subject it to true critical analysis, intellectual thought, it doesn't pass the smell test. It just doesn't. And, yes, there was an original sin. And America is responsible for that. That we did, in fact, practice slavery. But once again, if you're going to be intellectually honest and consistent, you have to acknowledge the fact that the institution of slavery is a human stain. It is not something created solely, exclusively by America. It wasn't like they got to the United States of America and they said, let's invent this thing called slavery. Slavery has existed throughout the history of mankind. And I know I've read all kind of documentation where people say, well, yes, but it was the type of slavery practiced in the United States that was unique. Yeah, man's inhumanity to man is well documented. And we can sit there and talk about Rwanda and the Hutu and Tutsi. I'm sure that the 1 million Rwandans who were slaughtered by other Rwandans in 1 month using machetes probably would have preferred to be put into slavery rather than be slaughtered up close and personal with machetes. And you can't blame that on the evil white man. See, once again, you don't want to have this conversation. I'm not saying that America is blameless. I'm acknowledging where America was at fault. But I'm also making it clear that you cannot put 100% of the blame on the United States of America because, and I'll say this and I gotta go, as Skip Gates made clear, and a lot of people are unaware of this, and if you didn't know, I hope you can go and Google this. Out of the approximately, see, nobody has the exact numbers, but it's approximated, there's an approximate 17 million or so African slaves that were sold from Africa and brought to the Western Hemisphere. Now you have to understand this, that slave trade was already taking place between Africans, Arab Muslims, and Europeans. Because let me just say this real quick, man, I'm getting all off topic, but I just want to say this real quick. It is absurd. It's absurd to think that a couple of white boys from Portugal, Spain, or whatever, and, you know, they can't even handle the climate in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. White folks can't handle the climate in sub-Saharan Africa in 2018. Even with all the air conditioning and all that, it's not the climate is not conducive to white folks. They can't handle the climate of sub-Saharan Africa in 2018. And like I said, you let me know when there's large numbers of European whites saying, I think I'm going to go hang out in Senegal. You know, I heard Burkina Faso was really great this time of year. Man, have you been to Cameroon? It's wonderful. No, Europeans are not going there in 2018. They're not going deep into the bush. So if you want to try to make the argument that in 1615, that a handful of white boys in, you know, sailboats took their behinds deep into the bush with nets and were throwing them over Africans and somehow managed to drag out 17 million Africans. You're stupid. You don't know how to think. You're just feeling. You're just going off of people tell you this, and you're like, yeah, and you get all hyped up, but you haven't thought. No. There was a trade that was taking place, which means it was voluntary. There were Africans selling their fellow African. Whether it was to Europeans or to Arab Muslims, they didn't care. So Africans who were sold from Africa, approximately 17 million, and about 10 to 12 million survived the dreaded Middle Passage. Remember, we haven't even had a conversation about the trans-Saharan slave trade where Arab Muslims were taking African slaves, which, by the way, it still is going on today. Long after the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade ended, the trans-Saharan slave trade, which is ran entirely by Arab Muslims, is still taking place today. But the dreaded Middle Passage of the transatlantic slave trade, about 10, maybe as many as 12 million Africans survived that Middle Passage. And it was a terrible thing. There's movies that documented Amistad and so on and so forth. But of the 10 to 12 million who survived, let's highball it. We'll say 12. Out of the 12 million who survived the dreaded Middle Passage, there were approximately, now people want to like, well, yeah, did people think, oh, they were all brought, you know, the large number were brought to the United States? No, about 5 million of them alone were taken to Brazil. The largest percentage of those slaves, over 5 million, were taken specifically to Brazil. The rest, the large percentage, were taken throughout South America, right? Guyana, French Guyana, English Guyana, Venezuela, and through Central America, right? Panama, what's now Panama, Costa Rica, so on and so forth. Taken throughout the Caribbean, you know, Jamaica, Grenada, so on and so forth. Only, and I'm not trying to minimize this, but it's just the reality, only approximately 400,000 of the 12 million ended up in the United States of America, the 13 colonies which became the United States of America. So how is it that out of all that, 400,000 out of 12 million, right? We're talking less than 4%. We're talking what, about 3% or so, give or take. Only about 3% ended up in the United States of America, the future United States of America, yet still somehow the United States of America is the boogeyman, the worst perpetrator of slavery, the one who is responsible, who should be held the most accountable for slavery. And here's the thing, here's the reason why. Nobody sues broke people or poor people. Here's the reality. If you're walking down the street, if you're in the ghetto, the hood, you know, the shanty towns of Appalachian Mountains or whatever, if you slip and fall in front of the home of some broke people, yes, I said P-O apostrophe. If you slip and fall in front of the home of some folks, you know what you do? You get your behind up, you dust yourself off, you look to see if anybody saw you fall, because you don't want anybody laughing at you and making fun of you, and you keep your behind moving. But if you slip and fall in front of a business, if you slip and fall in front of the house of a rich man, oh Lord Jesus, oh my back, oh my neck, oh Lord, I think I'm having a seizure. Oh Lord, my knee, my back, my ankle. Oh Lord, somebody, you know, help me, help me. That's what you do. Why? Because you want to be able to sue. And that's the reality of what's taken place, is people want to be able to sue. They feel they can get something out of this rich person. The rich person, the rich entity, the United States of America. And I would be, you know, I would actually have more respect for you if you were honest enough to say that. If you just say, yo, I'm just trying to get paid. You know what I'm saying, bruh? I don't care about all that. If they're going to give out money, I want the money. I'm trying to get paid. Say that. Be honest about it and say that. I mean, I think it still makes you a despicable person, but I at least respect the fact that you're willing to be honest about where you're coming from. As opposed to those who are like, no, it's an injustice and we have to be paid because it's the only way we can be made whole, and, you know, so on and so forth. And there's this disproportionate wealth among white people, and the only way that the Negro can be made whole and begin to catch up is if we're paid these reparations and so on and so forth. Okay, so once again, as I was saying, if that takes place, and I see y'all got me all fired up, and I'm continuing on this even though I didn't intend to talk about this for that long. But, you know, if you continue, if you're compensated, right? And then what? If you fail to match, let's say a generation goes by, so there's a cash payout, and then we go and track a generation later to see whether the wealth gap has been made up as a result of these punitive damages, these reparations being paid. If the wealth gap has not been closed, and then what? You know what I'm saying? You ever think about it? And then what? What you gonna say, homeboy? What you got to say about that? Here's what I know would happen. There would be the Marxist-minded intellectuals who would find a way to still blame Whitey. And listen, I despise the blame Whitey types. They're weak people. And most of them, once again, they're patently dishonest people. But, you know, it doesn't mean that, once again, that we don't recognize injustices that took place. It just means that if you're being honest, that you're just mad, your butt hurt. And so if this transfer of wealth takes place, okay, all those who were able to prove that they are descendants of slaves sold from Africa and brought to America, and X dollars are given, and 20 years later, the wealth gap has not been closed, are you just gonna, say, well, at least I got paid, and well, I'll just live my life from here on out? No, here's what you and I both know. Let's look at professional athletes. Let's look at entertainers. Those who got rich overnight. Now, granted, listen, I actually don't begrudge athletes and entertainers for earning the high salaries that they earn, because I believe in the free market, and they are actually bringing a product, good, or service to the marketplace that the marketplace wants. And the marketplace is fairly compensating them based on their value. And look, with athletes, yes, it seems like they get rich overnight, but people are failing to take into account the thousands of hours of hard work, working out, all the things, the sacrifices that athletes make and time they put into their craft in order to master their craft. So I don't actually begrudge them. I know a lot of people are like, oh, they shouldn't be paid all that amount of money. Listen, if you understand Econ 101, athletes and entertainers are paid, they earn the income they earn because of the scarcity of their knowledge, skills, and abilities. There's a reason why a quarterback in the NFL makes $25, $27 million, whatever like that. It's because millions and millions of people watch sports, were willing to pay to watch sports, and so there's cash flowing in, and the number of people in the world who have the knowledge, skills, and ability to perform as an NFL starting quarterback is infinitesimal. There's scarcity of their knowledge, skills, and abilities. And so, there is a reason why they're paid that exorbitant amount of money. Once again, it's because of the scarcity. So once again, I don't begrudge them. I'm a free market guy. I'm consistent with that, so I'm not going to begrudge the income that they earn. But here's the reality. Black, white, whatever, very few of them, while they may have taken a lot of time, invested a lot of time to master their craft, athletes and entertainers, almost none of them have invested the time to study and master the business aspect of the sports and entertainment business, of managing their finances. Now, the people who built the sports teams, they understand how to make money and how to make money grow. So they're engaging in free and fair trade. I hire you, I contract you to perform a service. I pay you to perform that service, and we're done. And so they pay those athletes and entertainers. We'll stick specifically with athletes. And here's the thing. People have complained that athletes are being used, and it's not fair that so many of them would be paid and then so many of them end up broke. It's funny because, like, on your job, your boss is not, if you have a 9-to-5 job, your boss is not obligated to give you financial training on how to manage the paycheck that they give you. They say, hey, I need somebody who can turn this nut on this bolt, and I'm willing to pay X dollars. I need somebody who can flip this burger. I need somebody who can, staple papers, who can balance this, who do whatever, and I'm paying X amount of dollars. You do what I ask you to do, I pay you, that's it. They don't have any further obligation. But people seem to believe that the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, whatever like that, has some sort of moral duty to give further financial training to athletes and entertainers, along with the multi-million-dollar salaries they pay them. And yes, so the NFL has rookie symposiums where they tell them, hey, listen, when you get paid this $1 million, multi-million dollars, don't go out and buy 2 Bentleys. You like nice cars? Fine. Buy 1 Bentley. Don't go out and get babies' mamas. Get married, have children with your 1 wife. Don't go buy multiple homes. Buy 1 house. Don't go out there and buy homes for your mama, cousins, best friends, whatever like that. If you want to take care of your mama, fine, but don't buy her a mansion in Beverly Hills. They teach all these things at these NFL, NBA rookie symposiums. And yet and still, the massive majority of professional athletes end up broke within a handful of years. Because they didn't know how to create wealth. They just knew how to perform a skill that allowed them to be paid. And when they were no longer able to produce or to perform that skill, their value in the marketplace went boom, disappeared, and they were no longer able to earn that. And they end up broke because they never adjusted their spending habits to, in accordance to what they were earning. And the same thing would happen, absolutely guaranteed, if African Americans were paid reparations. There would be people who would say, not only are African Americans deserving of reparations, but they must be given financial training on how to manage those finances. And still, I guarantee you, a generation later, I'll throw out a number, no less than 90% of the people who receive this lump sum payment would be broke, just like lottery winners. And people would be complaining and saying, well, they weren't given, they were still taken advantage of, they weren't given fair enough, they weren't given enough training to properly handle that, and it's still the evil white man's fault. It's still the fault of the United States of America. And that's the issue I have with this, is that anyone who really has stopped to think about this, who really thought this through, will recognize the folly, the ridiculousness of reparations. Those people, most lottery winners are worse off today than they were before they got their lottery winnings. And I guarantee you the same would be true, if not worse, for African Americans who are given reparation payments. So, like that dude, Frederick Douglass, said back in 1862 or whatever like that, when the question was asked, what shall be done with the Negro if they're emancipated? And his answer was, do nothing with the Negro. It is your meddling that has done us the greatest harm. And you can go and read that. Just Google it. Frederick Douglass, what shall be done with the Negro? And you'll come and find out that somebody like Fred Douglass, who was born a slave, who ran away from slavery, and the same thing like somebody like that dude, Booker T. Washington, who was born a slave, they who were born slaves and lived, Booker T. Washington spent his entire life in the Jim Crow South, they would tell you that don't give me reparations. Just give me liberty. And give me equality under the law. Everything else will do more damage than good. So anyway, listen, I've been running my mouth for a minute now, and I got to go. Thank you for listening in. Please, by all means, share this with friends. Take care. God bless.